The fracture belt: how resources and rival powers are remaking Africa's security landscape. Africa's conflicts are too often narrated as separate emergencies. Sudan as a Red Sea, Horn of Africa catastrophe, and the Sahel as a West African counter-terrorism theater. That framing is increasingly misleading. A connected fracture belt is emerging, a widening arc in which civil war, insurgency, displacement, illicit finance, and external competition reinforce one another across borders. In strategic terms, these crises are converging into a single regional security system with continent-wide consequences. Sudan illustrates how an internal war can rapidly acquire geopolitical gravity. Since April 2023, the collapse of state authority has fractured markets, degraded public services, and internationalized the crisis. By February 2026, around 4.3 million refugees remained displaced in neighboring countries, while Sudan's economy had contracted by 29% in 2023 and 13.5% in 2024. Over time, displacement becomes more than a humanitarian statistic. It becomes a driver of regional politics, border securitization, and fiscal stress for neighbors. When that pressure persists, governments are pushed into crisis budgeting, host communities absorb long-term service demands, and political attention shifts from development to survival. Further west, the Sahel shows how violence has evolved into a political economy of circulation. Since 2018, armed groups have moved beyond episodic raids to the control of roads, herds, and markets. In Burkina Faso alone, more than 8 million head of livestock have reportedly been stolen since 2017, and JNIM was said to be earning 25–30 million CFA francs a month from rustling in the north by 2021. The pattern became even clearer in Mali's 2025 petrol crisis, when JNIM's blockade of fuel imports helped turn supply routes into instruments of pressure on the state and on urban life, and police smuggling corridors. This is why battlefield pressure alone rarely delivers strategic results, because as long as these revenue streams and permissive spaces remain, insurgency can regenerate. Natural resources are the connective tissue that makes the belt geopolitically sticky. Critical minerals function as both prize and fuel, but gold is the most destabilizing because it is easily portable and hard to trace. In weakly governed zones, resource extraction becomes a parallel financial system, financing armed actors, distorting local authority, and incentivizing control of territory and transport routes. Resources also draw on external actors. In the Red Sea and wider Horn, some Gulf states, especially the UAE and Saudi Arabia as well as Israel, have pursued competitive statecraft through ports, logistics, diplomacy, and recognition politics. The UAE-backed expansion of Berbera Port since March 2017, Saudi Arabia's May 2023 mediation in Sudan, and Israel's formal recognition of Somaliland on the 26th of December 2025 all show how commercial access and geopolitical positioning have become tightly intertwined. Such engagement can stabilize when it strengthens institutions, but it can also entrench spoilers when local factions treat foreign backing as insurance against compromise. In the Sahel and adjacent zones, a different marketplace has emerged, one centered on regime security assistance. In Mali, the shift from French and UN backing to Wagner, and then to Russia's Africa Corps after June 2025, illustrates how external security support can become a tool of regime survival. Reuters reports that Africa Corps remained focused on training and equipment, even as Wagner's earlier operations were repeatedly linked to abuses against civilians and to missions outside Mali's military chain of command. In Nigeria, the pattern has recently appeared in Western form. After U.S. threats on the 1st of November 2025, Washington combined pressure with assistance to intelligence flights, a coordinated strike on the 25th of December 2025, and fresh military supplies on the 13th of January 2026. As security cooperation becomes more transactional, accountability declines, civilian protection weakens, and armed groups gain rhetorical and political space. China, the European Union, the United States, and Israel shaped the fracture belt through different combinations of geoeconomics, diplomacy, security cooperation, and strategic infrastructure rather than through direct force alone, access to markets, and investment in extractives. These tools can strengthen states when they create jobs, improve connectivity, and reinforce transparency. Yet in brittle environments, megaprojects can become magnets for predation, corruption, and attacks. Investment does not automatically produce stability when legitimacy has failed. Political fragmentation inside the belt compounds the risk. Coups, shrinking civic spaces, and diplomatic ruptures weaken regional organizations' ability to coordinate mediation, share intelligence, and apply collective pressure. When regional blocs fragment, crisis management becomes bilateral and ad hoc rather than rule-based and multilateral, raising the leverage of external actors and reducing Africa's bargaining power on debt, climate finance, and the terms of resource extraction. For East Africa, and Uganda in particular, this is not a distant drama but a balance sheet problem. Uganda's 2026 refugee response plan prices the burden at $850 million for 2.2 million refugees and 2.7 million host community members, with $356.75 million identified as the minimum prioritized spend across 13 refugee hosting districts. In education, the strain is already measurable. Uganda's ERP2 coasted refugee hosting education needs at $450 million for 2022 to 2025, while settlement schools were still averaging 135 pupils per classroom in primary education and needed an estimated 6,185 additional teachers just to reach minimum standards. The corridor bill is real too. The World Bank found that Red Sea disruption left the Drewry World Container Index 141% above pre-crisis levels in November 2024, raising the cost of trade that East African economies depend on. Even basic refugee support now reads like an austerity ledger. UNHCR warned in August 2025 that meeting essential needs in Uganda cost only about $16 per refugee per month, but funding shortfalls could force that down to $5. East Africa, in other words, pays a conflict tax in budgets, classrooms, and freight bills, even when it is not itself the battlefield. A credible response must therefore redefine security away from regime survival and external patronage, and towards civilian protection, accountability, humanitarian access, and lawful public authority. Civilian protection should be treated as a strategic imperative, and policy must follow the war economy through financial intelligence, commodity tracing, anti-corruption enforcement, and coordinated disruption of transnational logistics. Frontier governance is decisive too. Functioning courts, dispute resolution, and accountable policing in peripheral areas are how armed actors are outcompeted over time. Africa's fracture belt should be read for what it is, an emerging geopolitical system where war economies, strategic commodities, and rival patrons converge on weak institutions. Left unmanaged, it will not burn out. It will normalize permanent emergency and reorder regional stability. The choice is strategic: coordinate to contain the conflict economy, or accept a future in which armed actors and outside patrons set the terms of security.